Today's podcast is brought to you by the Hero Obscura podcast, the very same people who bring you the Noir Factory. You know, me. 5 days a week, the Hero Obscura podcast brings you the heroes you never knew you needed. He's a world-class athlete and a master of disguise, a billionaire playboy and a leader of men. He has one of the best minds of his generation and is skilled in every form of hand-to-hand and armed combat known to man. He's an escape artist and the world's greatest detective. There's an internet meme that kind of sums it up. It's always best to be yourself, but if you can be Batman, be Batman. Case number 31, the Batman. Today on the Noir Factory.
Noir, suspense, true crime, hard-boiled fiction. Explore the dark alleys and cheap gin joints of mob history, noir films, hard-boiled paperbacks, and two-fisted pulp fiction with mystery writer and make-believe detective Stephen Gomez. Grab your fedora and button your lip as you enter the office of the internet's finest fictional detective agency, the Noir Factory.
He's clearly a man with a mission, but it's not one of vengeance. Bruce is not after personal revenge. He's bigger than that. He's much more noble than that. He wants the world to be a better place, where young Bruce Wayne would not be a victim. In a way, he's out to make himself unnecessary. Batman is a hero who wishes he didn't have to exist. Frank Miller. In 1939, detectives and vigilantes ruled popular literary landscape. They were hard men who handed out justice at the end of a gun. Even the heroes that appeared in pulps, the early superheroes such as the Shadow and the Spider, handed out death sentences regularly, and whenever justice didn't come from them, it usually came in another fatal form, and no one seemed really broken up over it. But suddenly comics and comic books were picking up steam with the public, serving as moral compasses for the kids of America, and that brand of quick justice just wouldn't do. Names like Dr. Occult, The Clock, Superman, and the Crimson Avenger were all on the scene, and to tell the truth, the transition from pulp sensibilities to comic books was a little rough. Heroes still wailed on the bad guys with little regards to health or civil rights, and even Superman was not above sending a guy to the hospital. You know, if society needed that to happen. In truth, even Batman carried a gun around in those early days, but that went away quickly. Comics had a wider audience than the pulps, and Bob Kane and Bill Finger had a job to do. That job was not to protect American children. It was to sell comics to kids and their approving parents. Bob Kane was born in New York City in 1915 as Robert Kahn, and he started working at the Max Fleischer Studios as an animator when he was just 19 years old. At the time, Fleischer Studios were putting out Betty Boop cartoons, and they had a reputation for urbane, more adult fare than, say, Disney. Kane worked there for about 2 years before he made the move to his own studio, where he started working in comics. He initially produced work for National Allied Publications, which would later morph into DC Comics. He worked on more fun comics, creating the character Ginger Snap, Professor Doolittle for Adventure Comics, and Oscar the Gumshoe for Detective Comics. In April of 1938, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster caught lightning in a bottle with Superman in Action Comics. That caused National to change course with their funny animal comics and focus on heroes. Right from the start, Kane went to work on a character steeped in mystery and intrigue. That character, the Batman, was influenced by the popular culture of its time. It was part mysterious creature, like the Shadow of pulp and radio, part Lee Falk's phantom character from the Funnies, and part dashing swashbuckler, like Douglas Fairbanks' Zorro. He'd have a domino mask and bat wings and a red costume that struck fear into the hearts of not really many. While Bob Kane worked out his bat-winged acrobat, Bill Finger was still selling shoes part-time, and he was hoping for something a little bit better when he was invited to a party in New York. Milton Bill Finger was a son of Jewish immigrants, and he grew up in the same community as Kane. The two men met at the party, and Finger made quite an impression on Kane. Bob Kane invited Bill Finger to come to work as a writer for his studio, and Finger happily agreed. Soon he was ghostwriting for titles such as Rusty and Clip Carson for National Comics. It was during that time that Bob Finger shared drawings of this Bat character he was working on. National had been clamoring for a character to match Siegel and Schuster's Superman, and Kane had just the thing, but to Bob Finger, it seemed a little too much like the Man of Steel. He suggested that Bob lose the domino mask and give the character a cowl with bat ears. He also suggested losing the wings in favor of a cape and adding gauntlets. In short, he suggested the distinctive style of the Batman. In his autobiography, Bill Kane spoke of Bob Finger's contribution to the Batman. He described that work as a contributing force on Batman right from the beginning. I made Batman a super vigilante when I first created him. Bill turned him into a scientific detective. Bob Kane shared his work with Vin Sullivan, an editor with National, and right from the beginning, Vin was ecstatic. He couldn't wait to run the Batman and negotiated a deal with Bob, the owner of Kane Studios. It was a deal that did not include Bill Finger. Bill Finger's contributions to the character were notable. While Bob Kane developed the style and the look of the hero, Finger worked on the plot and characteristics. He wrote many of the early Batman stories and came up with characters like the Joker and Catwoman. He was responsible for naming the fictitious Gotham City, and he came up with the most famous superhero lair in comics, the Batcave. When Kane wanted to come up with a character that was a parallel to Bruce Wayne, it was Bill Finger that suggested a clear distinction. In the Sternenko history of comics, Bill Finger mentioned that Robin was an outgrowth of a conversation I had with Bob. As I said, Batman was a combination of Douglas Fairbanks and Sherlock Holmes. Holmes had his Watson. The thing that bothered me was that Batman didn't have anyone to talk to, and it got a little tiresome having him always thinking. I found that as I went, Batman needed a Watson to talk to. That's how Robin came to be. Bob called me over, and he said he was going to put a boy in the strip to identify with Batman. I thought it was a great idea. The demand for Batman stories was soon at a fever pace, and although Bob Kane drew like lightning, Bill Finger was a slow, meticulous writer who enjoyed researching his subjects and the settings. When he ran behind, it was Whitney Ellsworth, the editor of Batman, who suggested replacing Bill Finger. Gardner Fox was given the task of filling in temporarily for Finger. Fox was responsible for bringing in the gadgetry for Batman, things like a utility belt, a Batcopter, and the Batarang. When Finger returned and once again got to work with Bob Kane, they created a new cast of villains for the world's greatest detective. Finger worked with Kane to create the Joker, Catwoman, and the Penguin. The two even invented the giant props that went on to find homes in the Batcave. Eventually, Bill Finger left Kane Studios and went to National to work full-time. He worked with Superman artists to develop characters like Lana Lang, and he was responsible for bringing Kryptonite from the radio show to the comic books. Bill Finger continued to work on a number of comics all of his life, not only for DC, but also for Quality Comics, Fawcett Comics, and Timely, who would later on become Marvel. He passed away in 1974. And 20 years after that, Bob Kane listed Bill Finger as the official co-creator of the Caped Crusader. Bob Kane continued to work in comics until his retirement. He produced fine art, and he wrote his autobiography, Batman and Me, which he followed up with a sequel, Batman and Me, The Saga Continues. He passed away in Los Angeles in 1998 at the age of 83 and was survived by his wife and daughter, as well as a legacy of the world's greatest detective. They were born on other planets or created in laboratories. They uttered magical words that transformed them into bizarre and wonderful creatures. They learned forbidden and terrifying secrets from forgotten masters in mysterious realms. Or sometimes they just strapped a mask on and went to work. They're the heroes from popular culture you've forgotten. Men, women, and creatures like the Red Rube, Detective Chimp, and Brother Power the Geek. Heroes that for some reason or another haven't been made into blockbuster movies or limited edition multi-cover graphic novels. Beginning a week from now, 5 days a week, the Hero Obscura podcast profiles the forgotten heroes of yesterday. Written and produced by the same people who bring you the Noir Factory. Again, me. We will bring you short profiles of yesterday's hero featuring their powers, weaknesses, origins, and their current whereabouts. This is a project we've been excited about for a while, and we'd love to hear what you think. So in the next few days, we'll preview the first 3 episodes on the Noir Factory feed. You get a chance to make first contact, and you can really do us a solid by subscribing, leaving a review, or telling any of your friends who happen to dig heroes in general. And if you're anything like me, then that's a ton of people. Look for Hero Obscura on iTunes and wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And check back here with us. We guarantee that if you love heroes and history, heck, if you like today's show, then you're going to fall in love with Hero Obscura. Until then, keep watching the skies. And now this week's crime, already in progress. The story changes a little over time because there are a lot of different people who've told it. There was Bill Finger and Bob Kane, but also Julius Schwartz and Brian Boland. You have Carmine Infantino and Len Wein. You've got Geoff Jones, and you've got Mike Barr. You've got Alan Moore and Frank Miller, and the list goes on and on and on. But some things remain the same, always the same. This couple, Martha and Thomas Wayne, take their kid to the city to see a movie. They're dressed to the nines because that's what couple did back then, whenever back then was. They took their boy, young Bruce, the apple of their eye, to see Zorro. Almost always, the movie Zorro. After the show, they take a shortcut to their car, an ill-advised shortcut. Because this is Gotham City, and even though they are on Park Row's changing. The city is changing. There are whispers about the area, and in those whispers, they refer to the area as Crime Alley. The heroics and adventure of the movie fill young Bruce's head as he dances and jumps, and he thrusts and he parries, and he imagines that he is the hero of that screen. At the moment his imagination starts to take flight, a heavy hand presses his chest, bringing him back and letting him know that something is amiss. There's a man in the alley, and his face is covered. He holds a gun, and he demands money and jewels. In some stories, he's Joe Chill, and in others, he has no name. In some tales, he works for some mastermind, and in others, he's simply a loner. In any case, tonight he is an assassin, and in every story he pulls the trigger. Not once, but twice. In an instant, everything changes, and the carefree boy is an orphan. The killer, either horrified by his actions or by something in the child's eyes, turns and runs, leaving a young boy with the body of his parents in a cold, wet alley, and leaving that boy, now changed forever, to grow and become something that in turn changes his world. And that, in the 78 years since the character's debut, is the origin. And it's been told a lot of different ways. In some cases, the boy was helped by Dr. Leslie Tompkins, a local physician and friend of the Waynes, who becomes kind of a surrogate parent for Bruce Wayne. In other cases, the mother of the assassin, Mrs. Chilton, plays a role in raising young Bruce. But in every case, the role of the guardian and caregiver eventually falls to Alfred Pennyworth, the family butler. As a teenager, Bruce Wayne becomes obsessed with his parents' death and the abstract idea of justice. Wanting to turn himself into a machine dedicated to delivering that justice to Gotham, he starts to train. This time for Bruce Wayne is kind of a gray area, such as when Sherlock Holmes learns to become Sherlock Holmes. There are lots of stories by lots of writers, and again, a lot of them contradict each other. But again, in every case, the millionaire kid and his butler leave the city and they learn. He learns skills and discipline. He masters fighting styles and conditioning. He seeks out the best, and he masters everything they know. And he does this for both saints and killers alike. In addition to training his mind, he forges his body into a living weapon. There's no exercise overlooked. There's no meditation not investigated. By the time he's in his 20s, he is the embodiment of human perfection. So again, it's always good to be Batman. But the road there's pretty rough stuff. Once he returns to Gotham, he's ready to begin his mission. His major problem, though, is he has no idea what that mission is supposed to be. In a story by the great Len Wein, young Bruce Wayne attends law school, where a hypothetical is thrown out. A man and his friends steal a car and they go for a joyride. Feeling remorse, the man, who's a passenger, demands to be let out of the car. Before that happens, the car hits and kills a pedestrian. Is the man guilty of manslaughter? Asks the professor. Young Bruce Wayne raises his hand, and he says that the man was at that point in the vehicle against his will, and that alone would shield him from the charge. The professor tells Wayne that he is incorrect. The man is guilty of manslaughter. But professor, asks Wayne, is that justice? No, Mr. Wayne, responds the professor. That's the law. Finding that working within the law clashes with his ideals, Bruce Wayne dedicates himself to working outside of society. In Batman Year One, Frank Miller tells a story of a vigilante who dresses up in rags and army surplus garb to fight crime. He disguises himself with made-up scars and heads out into the night. And the results are not positive. He knows he can't work with a corrupt system, but at the same time, the vigilante persona is not working. He needs to create fear. He needs to become a symbol. But at that moment, he also needs medical attention. There's a bell nearby that summons his butler, who's trained in combat medicine, to come and patch his wounds because, again, Batman. But he won't call for that life-saving aid until he's shown the path to complete his mission. And luckily for young Bruce Wayne, as well as comic readers everywhere, a giant bat crashes through the plate glass window, giving a lost young man the dedication he needs for his journey. And what a journey it becomes. Initially, Batman is a meat-and-potatoes street hero, taking on kingpins and corrupt cops, but from the start, his world turns sideways. He goes up against feline jewel thieves, riddle-obsessed robbers, a penguin bandit, and so many more. In total, Batman amasses the most complete rogues gallery of villains to ever stand against any opponent, with the exception of Dick Tracy. At the very top of the heap is the clown prince of crime, the weird and mysterious Joker, perhaps comic book's most perfect supervillain. After all, what's more frightening than a clown? And for a character that's steeped in shadows and dark alleyways, his adventures have taken him everywhere to meet just about everyone. With astounding regularity, he travels the universe as well as time, and he's even gone to different planes of existence. And even death itself holds a little sway over the Dark Knight. Again, comic books. He has palled around with the last survivor of an alien race, a warrior princess, an undersea king, and a Martian fighter. He has crossed company lines to meet Captain America and Iron Man, and even shared adventures with Sherlock Holmes. Although there seems to be no off-limits for Batman, the character is forever linked to Gotham City and the famous Bat Signal. Early in his run, the character figuratively adopted a sidekick, a circus performer named Dick Grayson, who served as a counterpoint to the dark and moody Batman. As Grayson aged out of the system, for lack of a better term, no fewer than 4 others took up the mantle of Robin, each becoming heroes in their own right. The Dark Knight had a strong presence in media as well. He saw first life beyond comics in comic strips and radio, and from then, it was a serial in 1943, starring Lewis Wilson as Batman, and again in 1949, this time with Robert Lowry as the Cape Crusader. Novels starring the character have been written, and he was practically made for video games. On television, Adam West and Burt Ward portrayed the dynamic duo from 1966 to 1969. And the characters would see action again sporadically in the early 90s and 2000s. The specter of the Batman also features predominantly in the current Gotham television show. He's been depicted in games and merchandise, and even more than one stage show. He appears in some of the best cartoons this side of the Fleischer Studios, with Kevin Conroy as the pitch-perfect voice of the Dark Knight. But he's also made a huge impact in motion pictures, starting with Adam West's Batman the movie in 1966, to Tim Burton's Batman, starring with Michael Keaton's Batman and ending tragically with George Clooney's Batman and Robin. He currently appears in a darker form, beginning with Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins, starring Christian Bale, and continuing on for 3 movies before appearing in Batman vs. Superman with Ben Affleck. The hero continues to evolve in comics, and in a 1999 article, Batman's Big Birthday, David Finkelstein of The Guardian wrote, Batman is a figure blurred by the endless reinvention that is modern mass culture. He is at once an icon and a commodity, a perfect cultural artifact for the 21st century. Any place you might happen to choose is a good enough place to jump in on the comic book adventures of the Dark Knight, with reinvention being what it will be. But there are certain collections that stand head and shoulder above the rest. Batman the Killing Joke, Arkham Asylum, The Long Halloween, Batman Year One, and Batman Black and White are all great places and stories and sure to entertain you. And finally, it's with a little bit of sadness that I share, as I was researching this episode, Adam West, the Batman for a generation of fans, including myself, passed away at age 88 this week. Last night, the city of Los Angeles lit up the sky with a bat signal as a show of respect for the bright night. That closes the books on this case. Join us next time on the wrong side of the tracks at the Noir Factory, as we look at the best in true crime, noir, and hard-boiled stories has to offer. If you've enjoyed this podcast, then please subscribe on iTunes and leave an honest review. And be sure to stop by the website to fill up on pulpy and hard-boiled goodness. And remember, nice guys finish last.
Psst, still there? This week's special Noir Factory Dakota message is coming right up. Crack the code by visiting thenoirfactory.com/key.
13, 23, 22, 20, 10, 23. That is all. For the key to this code, visit thenoirfactory.com/key. That's thenoirfactory.com/key. Good night.